Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales that we're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. The room was warm, illuminated by the soft glow of candles flickering on the dining table. Matthew adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo as he refilled Gwen's wine glass. This was their tradition, dressing up, staying in, and celebrating Valentine's Day as though they were dining at the finest restaurant in the city. But something felt different tonight. Gwen sat across from him in her stunning red dress, her posture poised but her expression distant. Matthew had known this woman for 22 years, and tonight, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Happy Valentine's Day," she said, raising her glass. Her voice was steady but lacked its usual warmth. "To us," Matthew replied, forcing a smile. Yet his gut churned. Something wasn't right. They sipped their wine, exchanged pleasantries, and reminisced about past Valentine's Days. But the evening had an undercurrent of tension he couldn't ignore. "Matthew," Gwen said suddenly, setting her glass down. The sound of the stem hitting the table was sharper than he expected. His heart skipped a beat. She rarely called him Matthew, only when she had something serious to say. He braced himself. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she began, her tone measured. "About us. About me." Matthew set his fork down, giving her his full attention. He felt a cold dread creeping over him, gripping his chest like a vice. "Okay," he said slowly. "What's on your mind?" She sighed deeply, as though summoning courage. "We've been married a long time, and I've started wondering what it's like to explore other experiences." Matthew blinked, the words hanging in the air like a lead weight. "What kind of experiences?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Gwen met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I want to make our marriage open. I want to be with other men." The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, Matthew wasn't sure if he'd heard her correctly. The woman he'd loved and cherished for over 2 decades, the mother of his children, had just dropped a bombshell he couldn't fathom. "An open marriage," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Gwen said, her tone disturbingly calm. "It's something I need to do for myself." Matthew sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Every fiber of his being screamed to lash out, to demand answers, to beg her to take it back. But he knew better. "And what about me?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Do I get to explore too?" "No," Gwen said quickly, her tone firm. "This isn't about you. It's about me." Matthew let out a bitter laugh. "So let me get this straight. You want to sleep with other men, but I'm supposed to sit here and, what? Wait for you to come home? Be a supportive husband while you explore?" Gwen frowned, her confidence faltering for the first time. "Matthew, it's not like that. I love you. I just need this freedom to figure out who I am." He stared at her, his chest tightening with anger and disbelief. "And who do you have in mind for this freedom? Someone at work, perhaps?" Her face paled, her composure cracking. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Matthew's heart sank. He'd been right. This wasn't just a hypothetical idea. She already had someone. "Mark Taylor," he said, the name rolling off his tongue like venom. Gwen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? How do you?" "Don't insult my intelligence," Matthew snapped, his voice rising. "You think I haven't noticed? The late nights, the sudden business trips, the way you've been dressing differently? You've already opened this marriage, haven't you?" Gwen's lips parted, but no words came out. The guilt on her face said everything he needed to know. Matthew stood, pacing the room as Gwen watched him nervously. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. "Hello, Clarissa," he said, his voice steady. "It's Matthew. I think it's time we move forward with the plan." Gwen's eyes widened in horror. "Clarissa? Mark's wife? What? What have you done?" Matthew turned to her, his gaze cold and unyielding. "You think I didn't know? You think I'd let you humiliate me without a fight?" Gwen stammered, her composure crumbling. "Matthew, please. I can explain." "Save it," he said sharply. "You've already lost everything, Gwen. And now, you're going to face the consequences." Gwen sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and panic. For years, She had meticulously crafted an image of a perfect marriage, a devoted wife and mother who managed to balance work and home life seamlessly. But now, that carefully constructed facade was crumbling before her eyes. "Clarissa and I have been talking," Matthew said, his tone calm yet menacing. He leaned against the edge of the dining table, his arms crossed. "She's been just as much in the dark as I was. Until recently. I can explain," Gwen stammered, her voice trembling. It wasn't like that. "Don't insult me by lying," Matthew interrupted sharply, his eyes narrowing. "You think I don't know about the texts? The hotel rendezvous? Or the fact that you spent my birthday with him?" His voice cracked, and for the briefest moment his composure wavered. But he quickly regained control, standing tall. "You didn't just betray me, Gwen. You disrespected me. You disrespected our family." The first crack in Matthew's trust came months ago. Gwen had been acting differently, leaving early for work, coming home late, and suddenly taking a newfound interest in her appearance. At first, Matthew brushed it off as a midlife change. After all, they'd been together for over 2 decades. People evolve. But then, one evening, he noticed a text pop up on her phone while she was in the shower. The message read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. XO Mark." His heart sank. He felt like the ground beneath him had vanished, leaving him in a free fall. But he didn't confront her. Not immediately. Instead, he began to dig. He accessed her phone while she slept, scrolling through her messages with Mark. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The texts were explicit, filled with passion and longing that she hadn't expressed toward him in years. Matthew felt a mix of rage and devastation, but he kept it bottled up. If he was going to confront her, he needed more than texts. He needed undeniable proof. The next morning, Matthew hired a private investigator. Over the course of several weeks, the PI gathered damning evidence. Photos of Gwen and Mark holding hands at a cafe, stolen kisses in parking lots, and finally, the two of them entering a hotel together. When the PI handed over the file, Matthew felt a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the sheer audacity. Gwen had taken their marriage, their family, and his trust, and discarded it as if it were nothing. Reaching out to Clarissa had been a gamble, but it paid off. When Matthew contacted her, she was initially skeptical, but after sharing the evidence, her disbelief turned to fury. Mark had been her husband for 15 years, and she had suspected nothing. "We need to confront them together," Clarissa had said, her voice trembling with anger. "They think they're so clever sneaking around behind our backs, but they don't realize how foolish they've been." Together, Matthew and Clarissa crafted a plan to expose Gwen and Mark. The Valentine's Day dinner was the perfect opportunity. "I loved you, Gwen," Matthew said, his voice breaking. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Tears streamed down Gwen's face, but Matthew felt no sympathy. "Not anymore. I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I was lonely. You were always so busy with work, and Mark, he made me feel special. Don't you dare blame me for this," Matthew snapped. "Do you think I worked long hours for fun? I was providing for this family, for you. Everything I did was for us." "I'm sorry," Gwen sobbed. "Please, Matthew, we can fix this." He shook his head. "You didn't just cheat on me, Gwen. You betrayed our children, our life together. And the worst part? You didn't even have the decency to come clean. You wanted to turn me into a fool, asking for an open marriage after you'd already been unfaithful." Matthew picked up the envelope from the table and handed it to Gwen. "What's this?" she asked, her hands trembling as she took it. "Divorce papers," he said flatly. "I want you out of this house by the end of the week. We'll arrange custody for Jake, but I will not tolerate you bringing Mark anywhere near him." Gwen's face crumpled. "No, please, Matthew. Don't do this. I'll end it with Mark. I'll do anything to make this right." "You already made your choices," Matthew replied coldly. "Now you'll live with the consequences." Meanwhile, across town, Clarissa was delivering her own brand of justice. Mark had returned home to find his bags packed and a restraining order on the kitchen counter. Clarissa's fury was palpable, and she made it clear that their marriage was over. "You thought you could play both sides," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "But you underestimated me. You're going to regret this, Mark." As Gwen tried to plead her case, Matthew delivered the final blow. He played a recording of her and Mark's explicit phone conversations, captured by the PI. Her face turned white as the damning words filled the room. "You thought I didn't know," Matthew said, his voice icy. "You thought I was oblivious. But I've been one step ahead of you this entire time." Gwen collapsed into a chair, her body racked with sobs. For the first time, she realized the full extent of what she had lost. Gwen's sobs echoed through the dining room, but Matthew stood unmoved, watching her with a detached, almost clinical gaze. The papers in front of her were unambiguous: a legal separation, division of assets, and arrangements for custody of their son, Jake. Her mind reeled as she tried to process the gravity of what had just happened. Mark hadn't prepared her for this. In fact, Mark had always dismissed the possibility of discovery, assuring her that everything was under control. But it wasn't. Now, the walls of her carefully constructed life were collapsing around her, and she could feel herself suffocating under the weight of her choices. The last time Gwen had seen Mark was just 2 days earlier. They had met for lunch at a cozy cafe near her office, a routine they had established under the guise of business meetings. "I've been thinking," Gwen had said, stirring her coffee absently. "Maybe we should tell Matthew and Clarissa. You know about us?" Mark had chuckled, shaking his head. "Gwen, trust me, that's a terrible idea. Why complicate things? We have a good thing going here. Why risk it?" "But I hate the secrecy," she had protested. "I want to be with you openly. Isn't that what you want too?" Mark had leaned back, giving her a reassuring smile. "Of course I do. But let's not rush. We have time." Gwen had believed him then, but now, sitting across from Matthew, she realized the truth. Mark never intended to leave Clarissa. He had been stringing her along, using her as a distraction from his own unhappy marriage. Later that evening, Gwen tried calling Charlotte again. Her daughter's voicemail greeted her each time, and the messages Gwen left became increasingly desperate. "Sweetheart, it's Mom. Please call me back. I need to explain. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Charlotte had always been close to Matthew, admiring his unwavering dedication to their family. Gwen's betrayal had shattered that bond, and now she faced the heartbreaking reality that her daughter wanted nothing to do with her. While Gwen spiraled into despair, Matthew found solace in small victories. The day after the confrontation, he met with Clarissa to finalize their plans for the divorce proceedings. Sitting across from her in a quiet coffee shop, he felt an unexpected camaraderie with the woman who had been just as blindsided by betrayal as he had. "I'm done feeling like a victim," Clarissa said, sipping her tea. "Mark doesn't get to control my life anymore. And neither does your wife." Matthew nodded, her determination sparking something inside him. "I've spent so long trying to hold everything together. Maybe it's time to let go." "That's the first step," Clarissa said with a small smile. Matthew threw himself into rebuilding his life. He reconnected with old friends, started running again, a hobby he had abandoned years ago, and even took Jake on a weekend camping trip to Bond. Jake had been quiet since learning about the divorce, but during the trip, he finally opened up. "Dad," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, "I don't get it. Why did Mom do it?" Matthew took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they love. It doesn't mean they don't care, but it does mean they weren't thinking about what's best for everyone. Are we going to be okay?" Jake asked, his voice small. Matthew pulled him into a hug. "We're going to be more than okay, buddy. I promise." Days turned into weeks, and Gwen found herself increasingly isolated. Jake refused to speak to her, choosing to stay with Matthew whenever possible. Her parents, once her pillars of support, were distant, their disappointment evident in every strained phone call. One evening, Gwen showed up unannounced at Matthew's doorstep. She looked pale and disheveled, a shadow of the confident woman she once was. "Matthew, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you." He hesitated but eventually stepped aside, allowing her in. "I've lost everything," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Charlotte won't talk to me. Jake hates me. Even my own parents are ashamed of me. I don't know what to do." Matthew crossed his arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. "What did you expect, Gwen? That there wouldn't be consequences?" "I made a mistake," she sobbed. "A terrible mistake. But I still love you. I know I hurt you. But can't we fix this? For the kids?" Matthew's expression hardened. "You didn't just make a mistake, Gwen. You made a series of choices. You lied, you cheated, and then you tried to manipulate me into accepting it. There's no coming back from that." Gwen's plea for forgiveness turned into anger. "You're no saint, Matthew. You worked late every night. You were so focused on your career that you barely noticed me. And that justifies what you did." Matthew shot back, his voice rising. "I was working for us, for this family. Meanwhile, you were off playing house with another man. I was lonely," she shouted, her voice cracking. Matthew shook his head, his anger giving way to pity. "You weren't lonely, Gwen. You were selfish. And now you're paying the price for it." Gwen eventually left, her pleas unanswered. As the door closed behind her, Matthew felt a strange sense of peace. He had been through hell, but now he was free. In the weeks that followed, he finalized the divorce, ensuring that Gwen had no claim to the house or the majority of their savings. Clarissa had done the same with Mark, and the two of them stayed in touch, supporting each other as they navigated their new lives. For the first time in years, Matthew felt a glimmer of hope. His family had been fractured, but he was determined to build something stronger from the pieces. And as he watched Jake laugh around the dinner table one evening, Matthew knew he had made the right choice. As weeks turned into months, Gwen's world became a desolate landscape of regret and shame. She moved out of the family home and into a modest apartment on the edge of town, a far cry from the warm, bustling house she once shared with her family. The silence in her new home was deafening. Every room echoed with reminders of what she had lost. The picture frames she had brought with her felt like mockery, their smiling faces frozen in a time when her family was whole. Her attempts to reach out to her children were met with resistance. Charlotte refused to answer her calls, and Jake only spoke to her when absolutely necessary, his words clipped and cold. Even her parents, Jill and Robert, kept their distance. Their disappointment weighed heavily on her, made worse by Jill's scathing words the last time they spoke. "We didn't raise you to be this person, Gwen. You've embarrassed yourself, your family, and us." Gwen had clung to the hope that Mark would be her salvation, that their connection was worth the price she had paid. But Mark, too, had disappeared. After Clarissa confronted him and served him divorce papers, he severed all contact with Gwen. One evening, she worked up the nerve to call him, her hands shaking as she dialed his number. "Mark, it's me," she said when he answered. There was a long pause before he replied, his voice terse. "Gwen, this isn't a good time. I need to talk to you," she pleaded. "I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart." Mark sighed heavily. "Look, Gwen, I'm trying to fix things with Clarissa. She's willing to work things out, but only if I cut all ties with you." "What?" Gwen's voice cracked. "But you said—" "I know what I said," Mark interrupted, his tone impatient. "But things have changed. I can't risk losing my kids over this. I'm sorry, Gwen, but it's over." The line went dead, and Gwen stared at her phone in disbelief. Mark had used her, discarded her, and now he was crawling back to his wife in an attempt to salvage what he could. While Gwen's life spiraled downward, Matthew's began to flourish. His focus shifted from merely surviving the ordeal to thriving in its aftermath. He joined a local running group, where he found both companionship and a sense of purpose. He also began attending therapy, something Clarissa had recommended during one of their many late-night conversations. "You've been through a lot," she had told him. "Talking to someone might help." At first, he was hesitant, but the sessions proved invaluable. Through therapy, he gained clarity, recognizing that Gwen's betrayal was not a reflection of his worth, but of her own insecurities and selfishness. One evening, while attending a community event with Jake, Matthew struck up a conversation with a woman named Emma. She was a single mother, vibrant and full of life, with an infectious laugh that caught him off guard. They exchanged numbers, and over the weeks that followed, their connection deepened. Matthew took things slow, unsure if he was ready for a new relationship. But Emma's kindness and understanding made it easy to let his guard down. On their third date, As they walked through a park lit by soft lanterns, Emma stopped and looked at him with a gentle smile. "You're a good man, Matthew," she said. "Anyone can see that." For the first time in years, Matthew felt seen, not as a provider or a father or a victim of betrayal, but as himself. One rainy afternoon, Gwen showed up at the family home unannounced. She stood on the porch, drenched and trembling, her eyes hollow. Matthew opened the door, his expression unreadable. "Matthew, please," she began, her voice barely audible. "I know I don't deserve it, but can we talk?" He stepped aside, letting her in. The warmth of the house contrasted sharply with the cold rain outside, and Gwen felt a pang of longing as she looked around at the familiar space. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I let my selfishness destroy everything. But I still love you, Matthew. I always have. Can we try again? For the kids?" Matthew studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" Gwen frowned, confused. "You said it wasn't about us. It was about you," he continued, his tone calm but firm. "And you were right. It was never about us. It was about your choices, your lies, your betrayal." Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I've already forgiven you," Matthew said, surprising her. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to that anger was only hurting me. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean we can go back to the way things were." He stepped back, gesturing toward the door. "Goodbye, Gwen." As Gwen walked away from the house, her shoulders hunched against the rain. She realized that the life she had destroyed could never be rebuilt. For Matthew, the encounter was a turning point, a final chapter closed. He returned to the living room, where Jake was working on a school project, and sat down beside him. "You okay, Dad?" Jake asked, looking up from his notebook. Matthew smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Yeah, buddy, I'm okay." In that moment, surrounded by the quiet warmth of home, Matthew knew that he and his children would be more than okay. They were building something new, something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, Matthew felt free.